Psalm 46 verse 10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." Sometimes, life gets overwhelming. Maybe when you're lying awake at night and your mind won't stop racing, or perhaps during a busy day when pressures seem to weigh you down. Worries about tomorrow, regrets from yesterday, and the uncertainty of today can pile up until it feels like there's no room left for peace. But even in the middle of all that noise and stress, God offers you an invitation, a simple moment to pause, breathe, and be still. In that moment, He whispers to your heart, "Be still and know that I am God." When God tells us to be still, it's not just a command. It's a loving call to slow down, breathe deeply, and let go of everything we're carrying. No matter where you are or what you're facing, God is calling you to pause and allow His presence to fill your heart. The original Hebrew word for be still is rapha, which means to let go, to relax, to surrender. It's as if God is gently asking you to release your tight grip on all the fears, anxieties, and struggles that seem too big. He wants you to understand that He is right there with you and is more than capable of handling whatever weighs on you. In this quiet place, God invites you to stop striving, to let the burden fall from your shoulders, and to find rest in the assurance that He is God, unchanging, powerful, and always near. Right now, wherever you are, remember that God is present. He longs for you to experience a deep peace that only comes when you truly let go and trust Him with everything. Even stepping away from the chaos of life for a moment allows you to embrace stillness and tune into His voice, which speaks the loudest in the quiet. Quiet time isn't just a time of silence. It's a precious opportunity to bring our hearts humbly before God. Humility in these moments is not a burden, but rather an invitation to lay down everything that feels heavy. Think about visiting a doctor. We go and openly share our pain, knowing only then can real healing begin. Similarly, when we come before God with humble hearts, we admit that we need His grace, wisdom, and help. It's a gentle surrender where we let ourselves rest in His care, knowing He is ready to carry our burdens and heal the deepest parts of our hearts. We can look to Jesus as an example. In Luke 5 verse 16, we read that Jesus often withdrew to quiet places to pray. He didn't do this because He felt overwhelmed or burdened. He did it because He longed to be close to His Father. Even though Jesus was sinless, He still took time to seek God's guidance and rest in His presence. If Jesus, who held all power, needed these moments of quiet connection, how much more do we need them? Jesus' example shows us that quiet time isn't about being perfect. It's about coming as we are, with all our flaws, and knowing that God welcomes us with open arms. In our quiet time, we can lay down our worries, our fears, and our need to control everything. It's a safe place where we can say, "Lord, I need You. I can't do this alone." This surrender isn't a sign of weakness. It's a path to peace. It's a letting go of the anxieties that weigh us down and finding rest in knowing that God is near, ready to carry our burdens. When we approach God with humility, we open our hearts to receive His comfort and love. In these moments of trust and openness, we experience His comforting presence and His faithful care. Many of us long for approval and acceptance, whether from family, friends, colleagues, or even strangers. It's natural to want to feel valued and appreciated, but this longing can become a burden when it starts to overshadow our desire for God's approval. Seeking validation from others can create pressure and leave us feeling empty, even after we receive applause or praise. In these moments, God invites us to step away from the noise and distractions. Quiet time with Him allows us to put down our need for worldly approval and find our true worth in Him alone. Matthew 6 verses 1 to 6 gently encourages us to live for God in a way that's authentic, reminding us that His reward comes when we seek Him in secret, away from the eyes and expectations of others. Quiet time becomes a sacred place where we're free to be ourselves, where we don't have to perform or strive for approval. It's where God meets us as we are and reminds us that our value isn't based on what people think, but on what He thinks. When we seek God's approval above all else, we break free from the exhausting cycle of trying to meet everyone's expectations. In a world that values hustle, business, and constant activity, it's easy to feel like we always need to be doing more. Yet, 1 Thessalonians 4 verse 11 calls us to aspire to lead a quiet life. This is a refreshing reminder that God's ways are different from the world's. Leading a quiet life doesn't mean we ignore our responsibilities or avoid the life God has called us to. Instead, it means cultivating an inner peace that remains steady, even when everything around us feels chaotic. It's about grounding ourselves in God's presence rather than being swept away by the noise and demands that often overwhelm us. The idea of a quiet life speaks to the state of our heart and mind, a life marked by contentment, rest, and trust in God. During our quiet time, we practice this by coming before Him and choosing stillness. In these sacred moments, we lay down our worries and anxieties, trusting Him to renew and refresh us. It's a time to remember that our value isn't based on what we accomplish, but on who we are as God's children. We find comfort in knowing that God sees us and knows our hearts, offering His peace and strength. By embracing this quietness, we step into a life that is truly freeing. Quiet time with God is where He often does His most transformative work. Moses, for example, was alone with God when he received the 10 Commandments on the mountain. Elijah heard God's voice not in the fire or the earthquake, but in a still, small voice. These powerful encounters happened when people stepped away from the crowd to seek God in solitude. God uses these quiet moments to reveal His plans and purposes, to shape our character, and to prepare us for the paths He has set before us. When we prioritize quiet time, we place ourselves in a position to receive revelation, guidance, and strength. Throughout the Bible, we see how God performs miraculous transformations in the quiet, hidden moments. David, for example, spent years tending sheep before becoming king. God used those quiet years to build his character and prepare him for his future role. In our own quiet times, God builds our character and shapes our integrity. These private moments, when no one else sees, prepare us for the greater things God has in store for us. Just as David was faithful in the small things, we too can be faithful in our quiet time, allowing God to mold us for the future. Even Jesus, surrounded by crowds and constantly in demand, knew the importance of stepping away to be alone with his Father. Mark 1 verse 35 tells us that Jesus often rose early in the morning and went to a solitary place to pray. These moments were not just for physical rest, but were opportunities for Jesus to realign his heart with God's mission, to draw strength, and to seek direction. Jesus understood that quiet time wasn't about escaping responsibilities. It was about preparing his heart and soul to carry out God's will. His example shows us that if the Son of God needed moments of solitude, how much more do we need them? In quiet time, we receive the deep, unshakable reassurance that we are God's beloved. This identity grounds us when the world tries to define us by what we own, achieve, or how we look. Ephesians 1 verse 4 tells us that God chose us before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and blameless before him in love. Imagine that. Before you were even born, God thought of you, called you his own, and designed a purpose specifically for you. This truth is often drowned out by life's chaos, but in quiet moments, we hear it clearly. In the stillness, God whispers his love to us, reminding us that we are his. Quiet time isn't just for hearing God, but it's also a time when we can speak openly to him, bringing every joy, sorrow, and fear. Psalm 62 verse 8 invites us to pour out our hearts before him, trusting that he is a refuge. Unlike human relationships where we might feel hesitant to share everything, we can come to God without holding back. He already knows our thoughts and feelings, and yet he wants us to express them. When we pour out our hearts to God, we unburden ourselves, allowing his comfort to replace our fears and his peace to settle in our hearts. It's a safe space where nothing is too big, small, or complicated to bring to him. These moments of intimacy with God are like a deep breath for our souls. Just as our bodies need food to stay healthy, our spirits need these quiet times to stay nourished. Jesus taught us to pray for our daily bread, Matthew 6 verse 11. And this bread isn't just physical, it's spiritual sustenance. Spending time in God's Word and prayer is like filling our tanks with fuel. It gives us strength to handle whatever the day may bring and prepares us to face challenges with grace. Just as we wouldn't skip meals, we shouldn't skip these moments with God, for they provide us with the wisdom, patience, and courage we need. Quiet time also allows us to examine our hearts. In the hustle of life, it's easy to lose sight of our motives, our actions, and the condition of our heart. Psalm 139 verses 23 to 24 is a powerful prayer that says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me, and know my thoughts." Inviting God to search our hearts isn't about shame or guilt. It's about growth and alignment with His ways. In these still moments, we can ask God to reveal areas where we might need to change or let go of certain attitudes. It's a time of reflection and growth, where God gently corrects and guides us, leading us to become more like Him. In the quiet, we find that God not only speaks to us but often speaks through us. When we're tuned into His voice, we become sensitive to the needs of others and more attuned to opportunities to share His love. The peace we receive in our quiet time is something we can carry out into the world, becoming a calming presence to those around us. Isaiah 50 verse 4 speaks of how the Lord gives us the tongue of the learned, that I should know how to speak a word in season to him who is weary. This wisdom comes from spending time with God, where we receive the words, insight, and compassion to uplift others. The blessings of quiet time extend beyond personal peace. They help us become a source of encouragement and strength for others. When we are deeply connected to God, our lives reflect His light, and we become ambassadors of His love and grace. This connection empowers us to serve with joy, give generously, and respond to life's challenges with resilience. We become like trees planted by streams of water, bearing fruit even in seasons of drought, as described in Psalm 1 verse 3. This inner strength and stability are born from regular, intentional time with God, where our roots go deep, drawing life and sustenance from Him. Through quiet time, we also cultivate gratitude. When we pause to reflect on God's goodness, our hearts are filled with thankfulness for all He has done and continues to do. Philippians 4 verse 6 encourages us to present our requests to God with thanksgiving. In doing so, we shift our focus from what we lack to the abundant blessings He has provided. Gratitude transforms our outlook, lifting our spirits and enabling us to see life through the lens of God's grace. When we regularly practice gratitude in our quiet moments, we become more mindful of the countless ways God is working in our lives, even in the small details. As we deepen our connection with God through quiet time, we start to see His hand in the everyday moments. We become more aware of His presence in a gentle breeze, a smile from a stranger, or the beauty of nature around us. This awareness brings comfort, as we realize that God is with us not just in our quiet time but in every part of our lives. In Deuteronomy 31 verse 8, we're reminded that God goes before us, He is with us, and He will never leave us nor forsake us. This promise gives us courage to face each day with a confident heart, knowing that we are not alone. In the silence, God also invites us to dream His dreams and to see the possibilities He has for our lives. Jeremiah 29 verse 11 tells us, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." Sometimes, we can be so focused on our plans and our desires that we forget God's vision for us. Quiet time gives us a chance to lay our own ambitions aside and ask, "Lord, what do you desire for my life?" It's here that God reveals His purpose for us, aligning our hearts with His and filling us with a renewed sense of hope. The world around us often emphasizes success, business, and constant productivity. We're encouraged to always be on the go, striving to reach the next goal. But in God's presence, we find that our worth isn't tied to what we do or how much we accomplish. Psalm 46 verse 10 reminds us, "Be still, and know that I am God." In the quiet, we are free from the pressure to perform, allowing us to rest in the knowledge that we are loved simply because we are His children. Our value is not in our achievements, but in the fact that we are chosen, cherished, and held by God. In these moments, God teaches us humility. Quiet time helps us to let go of the need to control everything, to stop relying solely on our own strength. Proverbs 3 verses 5 to 6 encourages us to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. When we spend time with God, we learn to place our lives in his hands, trusting him to guide us in ways we might not understand but know are for our good. This surrender brings freedom because we no longer have to carry every burden alone. Instead, we let God lead, and our paths become clearer. During our quiet time, God also renews our minds, helping us replace anxious thoughts with his truth. Philippians 4 verse 8 urges us to think about things that are true, noble, right, pure, lovely, and admirable. In the stillness, we can allow God's word to fill our minds and hearts, pushing out thoughts of worry, doubt, and fear. We learn to meditate on his promises, filling ourselves with hope and strength. This mental renewal brings peace and stability, helping us to approach life's challenges with a steady heart and a mind anchored in God's truth. The peace we receive from God's presence becomes a shield, guarding our hearts from the anxieties of the world. It's a peace that surpasses all understanding, as Philippians 4 verse 7 describes, a peace that doesn't rely on circumstances but is rooted in the unchanging character of God. This peace is a gift that we carry with us throughout the day, and it allows us to remain calm, even when everything around us seems chaotic. We become like Jesus, who could sleep peacefully in the boat during a storm, knowing that his Father was in control. In the quiet, God speaks to us in personal, intimate ways. His voice is gentle, often described as a still small voice, as Elijah experienced in 1 Kings 19 verse 12. It's a voice that brings comfort, direction, and encouragement. When we give ourselves time to listen, we begin to recognize this voice more clearly, distinguishing it from the many distractions and influences around us. This connection deepens our faith, for we know that God is not distant. He is near, and he desires to speak directly to our hearts. Quiet time with God also strengthens our resilience. When we spend regular time with him, our trust in his goodness grows, making us more prepared to face challenges with courage. Psalm 23 reminds us that even though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we need not fear, for God is with us. In the quiet, we are reminded of his protection and his promises, and our faith becomes a source of strength in difficult times. We face trials with a heart that knows God is greater than any obstacle and that he works all things for our good. As we practice spending time in his presence, we find that God's love transforms us from the inside out. His love softens our hearts, making us more compassionate, patient, and forgiving. Colossians 3 verse 12 calls us to clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. In quiet time, God works these qualities into our character, shaping us to reflect his heart to the world. We begin to love as he loves, serving others with a heart that is selfless and sincere. The more time we spend with him, the more we become like him. Through this transformation, our lives become a testimony of God's goodness. When others see the peace, joy, and strength that come from our relationship with God, they are drawn to him. Quiet time is not just a personal practice. It's a way to impact the world around us. We become vessels through which God's love flows, bringing hope, encouragement, and light to others. Our lives become a reflection of his grace, a living example of the peace that comes from walking closely with our Creator. In these quiet moments, God also plants seeds of faith in our hearts, helping us to believe for greater things. Mark 11 verse 24 says, "Whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours." Quiet time becomes a space where we can dream with God, where we can bring our hopes and desires before him and trust that he will guide us according to his will. As we pray, God stirs up faith within us, helping us to trust him more deeply and to believe in his power to do the impossible. These seeds of faith grow into acts of courage, inspiring us to step out boldly in ways we might have once hesitated. As our confidence in God deepens, we begin to see ourselves through His eyes, capable, beloved, and empowered by His Spirit. Faith drives out fear, replacing it with a readiness to pursue the dreams He's placed on our hearts, even if they seem daunting. We remember the stories of people like David, who faced Goliath not with worldly armor but with a heart filled with trust in God. Similarly, our quiet time empowers us to face the giants in our lives, knowing that with God, we are more than conquerors. Courage rooted in God is not loud or boastful. It's a quiet, steady assurance. It shows up in small decisions, like choosing kindness when it's hard or staying honest when dishonesty would be easier. It shows up in standing firm in our values, even when the world pressures us to compromise. Galatians 6 verse 9 encourages us, saying, "Let us not grow weary of doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." In quiet time, God plants in us the strength to remain faithful and patient, knowing that He is working in ways we cannot yet see. As we step out in courage, God's faithfulness becomes even more real to us. When we see Him move on our behalf, our trust in Him grows. We remember that He was there in the struggles, providing for our needs and guiding us forward. This gratitude brings us back to Him day after day, eager to spend more time in His presence. In Psalm 34 verse 8, we're invited to taste and see that the Lord is good. The more we experience His goodness, the more we crave these moments of connection with Him, knowing they are a source of strength and joy. And in return, our relationship with God transforms our relationships with others. We learn to love others as He loves us, with grace, patience, and understanding. We carry His compassion into our families, friendships, workplaces, and communities. Quiet time becomes a training ground for our hearts, a place where God teaches us to forgive, to empathize, and to serve selflessly. Through His love, we become ambassadors of His peace, bringing calm to tense situations, offering kindness to those in need, and listening with open hearts to those who are hurting. In quiet time, God also gives us the wisdom to navigate life's challenges. James 1 verse 5 promises, "If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you." Life often presents us with tough choices, but in the stillness, God's Spirit guides us, helping us make decisions that honor Him and bring peace. We begin to rely less on our own understanding and more on His divine insight, knowing that His perspective is far greater than ours. This wisdom helps us make choices that bring lasting peace, joy, and purpose into our lives. Our quiet time, then, becomes a place where we find balance, a balance between action and rest, between ambition and contentment. We learn that life is not only about striving to achieve, but also about enjoying the journey, savoring God's presence, and living with a heart at peace. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 11 tells us that God has made everything beautiful in its time, reminding us to trust His timing and enjoy the seasons of our lives. We come to understand that our value is not measured by accomplishments, but by the love we share, the peace we carry, and the faith we hold. As we continue to spend time with God, we realize that the impact of quiet time extends beyond our own lives. It becomes a legacy we can pass down to future generations. When our children, friends, or loved ones see us making time for God, they too are encouraged to seek Him. Our example inspires others to find their own rhythm of connection with God, creating a ripple effect that brings His love and peace into more lives. In Deuteronomy 6 verses 6 to 7, God instructs us to keep His commandments in our hearts and to teach them diligently to our children. Our quiet time becomes a way to live out this instruction, to share the beauty of a life rooted in His presence. And as we grow closer to God, we discover that quiet time is not a duty or an obligation, but a gift. It's a sanctuary, a place of safety where we can be ourselves, where we can laugh, cry, question, and seek without fear. It's where God reminds us that we are His, that we are loved beyond measure, and that He has a plan for us. This understanding fills us with joy and peace, making our relationship with Him a source of unending strength and delight. We find ourselves longing to spend time with Him, not out of obligation but out of love. This journey of quiet time becomes a lifelong adventure, one where each moment brings us closer to understanding the depth of God's love. It's a journey that transforms not just our days but our hearts, shaping us into people who reflect His character and bring His light into the world. Through every season, every high and low, we find that God is constant, His love unchanging, His grace abundant. And as we walk this path, we realize that the quiet moments with God are some of the most powerful moments of our lives. They are where we find our true identity, our purpose, and our peace. With each day, our quiet time with God deepens, becoming the foundation upon which every part of our lives is built. And in this place of stillness, we encounter the heart of the one who loves us beyond measure, and we are forever changed. As we reach this point in our journey, we begin to understand that quiet time with God isn't something we add to our day. It becomes the heartbeat of our day. This time of stillness, prayer, and reflection becomes the anchor that grounds us in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable. And through these moments, we discover something profound. No matter what life brings, we can return to this sacred space and find peace, wisdom, and strength in the presence of our Creator. Over time, quiet time also shapes our vision of what truly matters. Instead of chasing fleeting successes, we start to value the things that endure: our faith, our relationships, our inner joy. The material goals that once seemed so pressing become secondary to the purpose we find in God. Our desires align more with His, and we see our lives in light of eternity, focusing on what builds His kingdom and serves others with love. The need for constant busyness fades, replaced by a sense of contentment that only God can provide. And when challenges arise, we face them with a different mindset. The storms that once threatened to shake us now feel less daunting, for we know we're not facing them alone. God's promises, planted in our hearts through quiet time, remind us that He will never leave us nor forsake us. Even in the darkest moments, His presence is a guiding light, His love a shield, and His wisdom a compass. Psalm 46 verse 1 tells us, God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. This truth becomes the foundation of our faith, giving us the courage to walk through trials with hope and resilience. Our quiet moments with God gradually become woven into every part of our lives, from our words and actions to our thoughts and dreams. We become more mindful, more compassionate, and more focused on what really matters. This transformation doesn't happen overnight, but as we return day by day to His presence, we find ourselves growing into people who reflect His love and grace. We become a living testament to the power of a life rooted in God, a life that, despite its imperfections, radiates His light. And as we look back on this journey, we see that each moment of quiet time has been a stepping stone, leading us closer to the one who calls us His own. We realize that the peace, joy, and strength we have found are gifts that come from drawing near to Him. Quiet time, once a simple pause in our day, becomes a cherished rhythm, a sacred space where we encounter God and are transformed by His love. In the end, we understand that quiet time with God is not just a practice. It's a relationship, one that sustains, guides, and blesses us in ways we could never have imagined. And with every moment we spend with Him, our hearts are reminded that we are loved, we are seen, and we are His forever.